If you ever feel like you're being followed, get into the first car that stops. Just make sure it's the right one. Lily Carter didn't check the license plate, didn't check the driver's name, didn't even check her own reflection in the dark glass before yanking the back door open and sliding inside. Her breath uneven, fingers trembling as rain hammered against the roof in sharp, relentless bursts, the kind of cold March storm that made the streets of Chicago blur into streaks of neon and shadow. And for a moment, she just sat there, clutching her worn canvas bag to her chest like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality, while the faint scent of leather and something clean, expensive, unfamiliar wrapped around her like a quiet contradiction to everything she'd known lately. And then the voice came from the front seat, calm, steady, almost too composed for a rideshare driver on a night like this. "You okay back there?" And Lily flinched slightly, pulling her hood lower over her damp hair, forcing her voice to steady as she leaned forward just enough to be heard. "Just drive, please," because explaining would take too long, and trusting a stranger felt easier than turning around to see if the man across the street was still there, watching, waiting, the memory of his lingering stare still pressing against the back of her mind like a warning she couldn't shake. And the car eased into motion, tires cutting through puddles as the city lights smeared across the windows, and neither of them spoke for a few seconds that felt longer than they should have, until the driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes sharp but unreadable, like he was measuring something he couldn't quite define, and Lily looked away first, exhaling slowly as she loosened her grip on the crumpled $20 bill in her hand, her last bit of cash, her last bit of control, before letting it fall into her lap as if it didn't matter anymore. And she almost laughed under her breath at the absurdity of it all, how one wrong turn, one bad decision, one stolen savings account had unraveled everything she'd spent years trying to build. And now here she was, soaked, exhausted, climbing into a stranger's car without even knowing his name, while the man in the front seat, Adrian Wolfe, though she didn't know it yet, tightened his fingers slightly on the steering wheel, the faint glow of the dashboard reflecting off a watch that cost more than most people's rent, hidden just enough beneath his sleeve to go unnoticed, because tonight he wasn't supposed to be seen, not by the press, not by his board, not by anyone, and certainly not by the girl in his back seat, who looked like she had nothing left to lose but still chose to trust him anyway. And as the rain intensified, drumming harder against the windshield, Lily finally spoke again, softer this time, almost to herself. "I think I got into the wrong car." And Adrian let out a quiet breath, something between a sigh and a half-smile, his eyes flicking to the mirror once more before returning to the road ahead. "Yeah," he said, voice low, almost thoughtful. "You probably did." The car moved smoothly through the rain, cutting across slick streets and glowing intersections as Lily leaned her head lightly against the cool window, watching the city blur past in streaks of gold and red, her heartbeat slowly settling into something less frantic but still uneasy. Because even though she had escaped whatever had been waiting back there, she had no idea where she was going now or who she was trusting to get her there. And that realization pressed quietly into her chest as she straightened up and cleared her throat, trying to sound more composed than she felt. "I am sorry. I think I really did get into the wrong ride," she said, her voice softer now, edged with a kind of embarrassment that only came when survival instinct faded and reality stepped back in. And Adrian let out a small breath that almost sounded like a quiet laugh, though he did not turn around, his eyes fixed on the road as the windshield wipers kept a steady rhythm. "You are not the first person to say that tonight," he replied, his tone calm, controlled, giving nothing away, and Lily frowned slightly, glancing toward the dashboard where the rideshare app should have been glowing but was not, just a clean, minimal interface with no visible destination, no driver profile, nothing that reassured her this was normal. And for a second doubt flickered across her face before she pushed it aside, because normal had not exactly been working in her favor lately. "Can you just drop me anywhere downtown?" she added, shifting her bag closer to her side as if grounding herself. "I just need somewhere with lights." And Adrian nodded once, a subtle motion. "Downtown is about 15 minutes from here with traffic," he said, his voice steady, almost reassuring in its precision. And something about that, the way he spoke, made Lily look at him more closely through the mirror, noticing details she had missed before, the sharp cut of his jaw, the way his posture stayed perfectly straight even when the car slowed at a red light, the quiet confidence that did not match the job she assumed he had, and she hesitated before asking, "How long have you been driving?" And this time Adrian did smile faintly, though it did not quite reach his eyes. "Not long," he answered, and that was it. No elaboration, no attempt to fill the silence, just enough to satisfy the question without revealing anything real. And Lily let out a small breath, nodding as if that made sense, even though it did not, and she looked down at her lap again, picking at the edge of the crumpled bill between her fingers before finally holding it up slightly. "I only have this," she admitted, her honesty slipping out before she could stop it. "So if this costs more than $20, I will figure something out later." And Adrian's grip on the wheel tightened just slightly, a reaction so small most people would not notice, but his voice remained even. "Keep it," he said, almost immediately, and Lily blinked, caught off guard. "No, I cannot just," she started, but he cut in gently, still not turning around. "You might need it more than I do." And something in the way he said it made her pause, because it did not sound like pity or charity. It sounded like fact, and for the first time since she had gotten into the car, Lily felt something shift, a quiet, unfamiliar sense of safety, like maybe this mistake was not going to make things worse, maybe for once it might actually lead somewhere unexpected. And as the car turned onto a wider avenue lined with tall glass buildings reflecting the storm, the radio crackled faintly to life, a news anchor's voice cutting through the silence. Still no confirmed sighting of Adrian Wolfe, the billionaire CEO who has remained out of public view for over 48 hours, and Lily barely registered it, but Adrian did, his eyes flicking briefly to the console before reaching forward and switching it off. The car falling back into silence as if the world outside had been shut away, and Lily glanced up again, curiosity starting to replace fear, because something about this night, this driver, this wrong turn, did not feel random anymore. The silence after the radio clicked off lingered longer than it should have, stretching thin between them as the car glided past rows of illuminated storefronts and darkened offices, and Lily found herself staring at the back of Adrian's head, studying the subtle details she had ignored before, the clean lines of his haircut, the way his shoulders stayed steady and composed no matter how slick the road became. And it did not match the image she had in her mind of someone picking up random fares on a stormy night. "You turned that off pretty fast," she said finally, her voice light, but edged with curiosity, and Adrian did not answer right away, his fingers tapping once against the steering wheel before settling again. "News gets repetitive," he replied, tone neutral, almost dismissive, and Lily let out a quiet hum as if accepting that, but her eyes drifted again to the center console, noticing now the subtle details that did not belong, the stitching on the seats too precise, the dashboard too refined, the quiet hum of the engine too smooth, like it was built for something far beyond city rides, and she shifted slightly in her seat, pulling her bag closer, her fingers brushing against the edge of her sketchbook inside, a habit more than a need. "This is not really an Uber, is it?" she said, not accusing, just stating what was slowly becoming obvious. And Adrian's jaw tightened just a fraction before he exhaled slowly. "It is a car," he said. And for a moment Lily almost laughed, shaking her head softly as she leaned back. "That is not an answer," she murmured. But there was no fear in her voice now, only a strange sense of intrigue. And Adrian glanced at her through the mirror again, this time holding her gaze for a second longer than before, like he was deciding something, measuring how much to reveal without saying anything at all. "You needed a ride," he said quietly. "I was there." And Lily looked at him, really looked this time, and something about that simple statement landed deeper than it should have, because it was true in a way that went beyond the situation, beyond the rain and the wrong turn and the strange coincidence of it all, and she let out a slow breath, nodding once as she turned her attention back to the window, watching as the streets widened and the buildings grew taller, glass towers rising into the stormy sky like silent giants. "I guess that is all that matters right now," she said softly, and for a while neither of them spoke again, the rhythm of the rain filling the space where words might have been, until the car slowed near an intersection where a group of people huddled under a flickering streetlight, waiting for the crosswalk to change, and Lily watched them for a moment before speaking again, quieter this time, more honest. "I was not supposed to be here tonight," she admitted, her voice barely above the hum of the engine. And Adrian's attention sharpened, though his expression did not change. "Where were you supposed to be?" he asked, and Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag before she answered, "Somewhere safe." And that single word hung in the air, heavier than anything she had said before, and Adrian felt it, a shift in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with the storm outside, something real, something unguarded. And for the first time since she had gotten into the car, he spoke without deflection, without distance. "Then we will get you there," he said, his voice low but certain, and Lily closed her eyes for just a second, letting that settle, not because she fully trusted him yet, but because for the first time in a long time, she wanted to believe someone when they said it. The car turned off the main avenue and onto a quieter street where the glow of downtown softened into something calmer, more residential, and Lily straightened slightly in her seat, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings as if trying to piece together where exactly he was taking her, because this did not look like the busy, well-lit part of downtown she had asked for. "This is not where most people get dropped off," she said carefully, not accusing but alert again, and Adrian slowed the car as they passed a row of older brick buildings, each with warm lights glowing behind rain-streaked windows. "It is still downtown," he replied evenly, "just not the part people rush through." And Lily frowned faintly, watching as he pulled up near a corner where a small cafe sat open despite the storm, its windows fogged, soft yellow lights spilling onto the wet sidewalk like a quiet invitation. And something about it felt safe in a way the crowded streets never did. "You can stay there as long as you need," Adrian added, shifting the car into park but not turning around yet. "They are open late, and it is warm." And Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening around her bag again, because this was the moment where she had to decide if this strange, unexpected kindness was something she could accept or something she should question, and she looked at him through the mirror once more, searching for anything that felt wrong, anything that told her to run, but all she saw was the same steady expression, calm, unreadable, patient, like he was not trying to convince her of anything at all, just offering. And she let out a slow breath, nodding slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, more sincere than before, and she reached for the door handle before pausing, something else catching her attention. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. And Adrian's hand rested loosely on the steering wheel as he considered it for a second, his gaze lowering just slightly as if the answer was not as simple as it should be. "Because you needed it," he said finally, and Lily studied him for another moment, sensing there was more behind that answer but choosing not to push, because for tonight, that was enough. And she opened the door, the cold air rushing in instantly as the rain tapped against the frame, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she turned back toward the car, leaning down slightly toward the open window. "You never told me your name," she said, a small, almost hesitant smile forming despite everything, and Adrian met her eyes fully this time, the distance between them suddenly feeling smaller than it had the entire ride. "Adrian," he replied, and Lily repeated it softly, as if committing it to memory. "Lily," she said in return, though he already knew that much from the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she trusted too easily for someone who had clearly been through too much. And for a brief second neither of them moved, the rain filling the silence between them, until Lily finally stepped back, giving a small nod before turning toward the cafe, pushing the door open and disappearing into the warmth inside. And Adrian watched her through the window for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes following the way she found a seat near the corner, setting her bag down carefully as if it held everything she had left, and something in his chest shifted, subtle but undeniable, before he looked away, reaching for the console where his phone sat silent for hours until now, the screen lighting up with missed calls and messages that all said the same thing in different ways: urgent, demanding, searching, and one headline still flashing across the top, his name in bold letters. The world asking where Adrian Wolf had gone. And he exhaled slowly, leaning back in his seat as the rain continued to fall, knowing that for the first time since he disappeared, he had chosen exactly where he wanted to be. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around Lily the second she stepped inside, a soft contrast to the cold rain still clinging to her sleeves and hair, and she paused just beyond the door for a moment, as if unsure whether she truly belonged there, her eyes scanning the room where a few late-night customers sat quietly with laptops or coffee cups, their conversations low and distant, normal in a way that felt almost unfamiliar to her now. And she exhaled slowly before moving toward the corner seat she had noticed from outside, sliding into the chair and setting her worn bag gently on the table as if it held something fragile, something important, and for a few seconds she simply sat there, hands resting on the surface, letting the reality of the last 20 minutes settle in, because nothing about it made sense, and yet somehow it felt more real than anything else that had happened to her that day. And her fingers moved instinctively toward the zipper of her bag, pulling it open just enough to take out her sketchbook, the edges softened from use, pages filled with unfinished drawings and ideas that had never quite found their place, and she flipped it open absent-mindedly, tracing the lines of a half-completed sketch with her fingertip while her thoughts drifted back to the car, to the quiet voice of a stranger who had not asked for anything in return, who had not questioned her beyond what was necessary, who had simply shown up when she needed someone to, and that alone felt strange enough to stay with her. And she glanced toward the window without realizing it, her eyes searching the rain-blurred street outside, as if expecting to still see the car there, but it was gone. The space empty except for reflections of passing headlights, and something in her chest tightened just slightly at that. A feeling she did not want to name, and she shook it off quickly, focusing instead on the present as a server approached with a small, polite smile, asking what she would like, and Lily hesitated, her fingers brushing again against the crumpled bill in her pocket before she ordered something simple, something that would stretch the night a little longer. And as the minutes passed, the cafe settled into a steady rhythm around her, the hum of conversation, the clink of cups, the soft music playing overhead. And for the first time that day, she felt her shoulders relax just a little, her guard lowering in small, careful steps, until her attention shifted. Again, drawn to the television mounted near the counter where muted news footage flickered across the screen, captions scrolling beneath images of a man in a tailored suit, his expression confident, composed, unmistakably in control, and Lily frowned slightly, her gaze narrowing as something about him felt familiar, not from memory, but from somewhere closer, more immediate, and she leaned forward just a fraction, trying to see more clearly through the reflections on the glass, and then it clicked, not fully, not completely, but enough to make her sit back again, her heart giving a small, uncertain shift as she looked down at her sketchbook, at the blank space waiting to be filled, and without thinking she picked up her pencil and began to draw, her hand moving quickly, capturing details she had not realized she remembered, the angle of a jaw, the quiet focus in a pair of eyes, the stillness of someone who carried more than he showed, and she paused halfway through, staring at the lines forming on the page, realizing with a quiet sense of disbelief that she was drawing him, not the man on the screen, but the man who had just driven her through the storm, and she sat there for a long moment, the pencil hovering above the paper as a single thought settled in her mind, soft but persistent, that maybe tonight had not been a mistake at all. Maybe it had been the beginning of something she did not yet understand. Lily stared at the sketch for longer than she intended, her pencil still hovering just above the page as the lines seemed to come alive in a way that made her chest feel tight and unsettled, because it was not just a drawing anymore. It was recognition, and she did not understand how she could recognize someone she had only met for less than an hour. And yet there it was, in the curve of the lines, in the quiet intensity she had captured without even trying, and slowly her gaze lifted back, toward the television where the same man appeared again, clearer this time as the camera zoomed in, the caption beneath reading his name in bold letters, Adrian Wolfe, and Lily felt the air shift around her, subtle but undeniable, like the room had tilted just slightly off balance, and she leaned forward instinctively, her heart beginning to beat faster as the news anchor's voice played softly beneath the cafe noise, explaining how one of the most influential billionaires in the country had disappeared from public view, how speculation was growing, how no one seemed to know where he had gone, and Lily swallowed slowly, her eyes moving between the screen and the sketch in front of her, back and forth, again and again, until the realization finally settled in, not all at once, but in small, undeniable pieces, that the man she had trusted, the man who had driven her through the storm without asking for anything, was not just a stranger. He was someone the entire world was searching for. And she sat back in her chair, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table as a quiet wave of disbelief moved through her, because nothing about him had felt like that. Nothing about his voice or the way he carried himself had matched the image on the screen. And yet now that she looked closer, really looked, she could see it. The same eyes, the same stillness, the same sense of control hidden beneath something quieter, something more human. And she let out a slow breath, her thoughts racing in different directions at once, trying to make sense of what this meant, not just for him, but for her, for the moment they had shared, for the fact that she had gotten into the wrong car and somehow ended up crossing paths with someone like that. And her first instinct was to laugh, a soft, almost disbelieving sound that escaped before she could stop it, because it felt unreal, like something that only happened in stories, not in real life, not to someone like her. And yet the evidence sat right in front of her, impossible to ignore, and she glanced down at the $20 bill still resting near her hand, the same bill he had told her to keep, and suddenly it felt different, heavier somehow, like it carried more meaning than it should have, and her fingers brushed over it lightly before she looked back at the door, at the rain still falling outside, and a question formed in her mind, quiet but persistent. Why would someone like him choose to be out there, driving alone in the middle of the night? Why would he hide instead of staying where he belonged? And more importantly, why had he stopped for her? And Lily sat there for a long moment, caught between curiosity and something deeper she could not quite name, until she made a decision that surprised even herself, and she closed her sketchbook carefully, slipping it back into her bag as she stood up from the table, her gaze fixed on the door as if it might still lead her back to the answer she did not yet understand, because for the first time in a long time, she did not feel like she was running away from something. She felt like she was being pulled toward it. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Lily stepped back out into the rain, the cold air hitting her face again, but this time it did not feel as harsh. It felt sharper, clearer, like something inside her had shifted into focus, and she stood there for a moment under the awning, her eyes scanning the street, as if expecting to see the same car waiting exactly where it had been, but the curb was empty, the rain washing away any sign that he had ever been there at all. And for a second, doubt crept in, quiet and insistent, telling her this was foolish, that she was chasing something that did not belong to her world. But then she looked down at her bag, at the sketchbook inside, at the drawing she had just made without thinking, and that doubt did not feel as strong anymore. And she stepped forward, out into the rain, pulling her jacket tighter as she moved along the sidewalk, her eyes moving from one passing car to another, searching, not really knowing what she expected to find but unwilling to just let the moment disappear. And across the street a black car slowed briefly at a light, its silhouette familiar enough to make her heart skip, and without thinking she crossed toward it, her steps quickening despite the slick pavement. But by the time she reached the corner the light had changed, and the car was already gone, merging into the flow of traffic like it had never been hers to follow. And Lily stopped there, breathing slightly faster, her hands cold from the rain, and she let out a small, almost frustrated laugh at herself, because of course it would not be that simple. Of course he would not just still be there waiting. And she turned slowly, her gaze lifting toward the towering buildings surrounding her, glass and steel reflecting the storm and the city lights in a way that suddenly felt different now that she knew who he was, because somewhere in that world, that distant, unreachable world, he belonged, and she did not. And the thought settled in her chest heavier than she expected, not because she wanted anything from him, but because something about the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, had made her forget that difference even existed. And now it was back, clear and undeniable, and she shook her head slightly, pushing the thought away as she stepped back toward the cafe, because chasing him through the rain was not going to change anything. But just as she reached the door again, something caught her attention. A sleek black card lying near the edge of the sidewalk, half hidden by a thin stream of water running along the curb, and she paused, bending down to pick it up, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface as she turned it over, and her breath caught just slightly as she saw the embossed lettering. Simple, minimal, unmistakably expensive, a name printed in clean, sharp lines, Adrian Wolf. And beneath it a single line of contact information, no company logo, no title, just a number, and Lily stared at it for a long moment, the rain tapping softly against her shoulders as the realization settled in again. Deeper this time, more personal, because this was not something meant for the world, it was something he had left behind, intentionally or not. And she closed her fingers around the card slowly, her heart beating a little faster as a new question formed in her mind. Not about who he was, but about why he had let this happen, why he had allowed a stranger to see him like that. Even for a moment, and she slipped the card into her pocket carefully, as if it mattered more than it should, before pushing the cafe door open again, stepping back into the warmth with a different kind of awareness, because now she was not just someone who had taken the wrong ride. She was someone who had been given a choice, whether to let that moment fade into nothing, or to follow it into something she could not yet see. Lily sat back down at the same corner table, but everything felt different now. The warmth of the cafe no longer just a place to rest, but a space where something had shifted inside her, something she could not ignore, and her fingers slipped into her pocket, pulling out the card again, turning it over slowly as if expecting it to disappear if she looked away for too long, and she stared at the name printed on it, Adrian Wolf, letting the weight of it settle in fully this time, because it was no longer just a headline on a screen or a face she had sketched without thinking. It was real. It was connected to her now in a way she could not explain, and she exhaled softly, leaning back in her chair as the sounds of the cafe faded slightly into the background, her thoughts pulling her somewhere else entirely, replaying every moment in the car with a new perspective, the way he had spoken, the way he had avoided certain questions, the quiet confidence that had not needed to prove anything. And now it all made sense in a way that felt almost unsettling, because he had not just been hiding from the world, he had been choosing what parts of himself to show, and somehow, for a brief moment, he had chosen to show something real to her. And Lily swallowed slowly, her thumb brushing over the edge of the card as a new thought formed, one that made her hesitate, because this was not just about curiosity anymore. It was about whether she should step into something that could change everything. And she glanced toward the television again, where the news continued to loop the same images, the same questions, the same speculation, people trying to understand a man they only knew from a distance, and she realized that she had seen something they had not, something quieter, something unguarded, and that realization carried a strange kind of responsibility, one she was not sure she was ready for. And her gaze dropped back to the number printed beneath his name. Simple, direct, an invitation that might not have been meant as one, and she let out a small breath, almost a laugh, because of all the things that had gone wrong in her life lately. This was the one thing that felt like it had landed exactly where it was supposed to, and she reached for her phone slowly, her hand pausing just above it as doubt crept in again, reminding her of the distance between their worlds, the reality that he belonged somewhere far beyond anything she understood, and that calling that number might not lead to anything real at all. And for a moment she almost pulled her hand back, almost let the opportunity slip away like everything else had. But then she thought about the way he had looked at her, not as someone beneath him, not as someone temporary, but as someone worth stopping for. And that was enough, and she picked up her phone, unlocking it with steady fingers before carefully entering the number from the card, each digit pressing into place with a quiet sense of finality. And when she finished, she stared at the screen for a second longer, her heart beating just a little faster, not from fear, but from something closer to anticipation. And then, before she could change her mind, she pressed call, lifting the phone to her ear as the line began to ring. Once, twice, the sound echoing softly in the space around her, blending with the hum of the cafe, and Lily closed her eyes briefly, holding her breath without realizing it, because in that moment, everything seemed to narrow down to this single choice, this single connection, and whether or not he would answer. The ringing stretched just a second longer than Lily expected, each tone echoing softly against her ear as her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. And for a brief moment, she wondered if he would not answer at all, if this would simply be another moment that almost happened but did not, another door that closed before she could step through it. And then the line clicked, the sound subtle but unmistakable, followed by silence. Not empty, but waiting, and then his voice, low, steady. Exactly as she remembered. You were not supposed to call, Adrian said, not surprised, not annoyed, just certain, like he had already considered this possibility. And Lily let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, her lips parting slightly as she tried to find the right words, but nothing felt prepared enough for this moment. So she settled on the truth. You left your card, she said, her voice softer than she intended, and there was a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel intentional. I know, he replied, and that single sentence shifted everything. Because it meant this was not an accident, not something dropped carelessly on a wet sidewalk. It was something left behind, something meant to be found, and Lily sat a little straighter in her chair, her eyes drifting toward the rain-streaked window as she processed that. So you wanted me to call, she said, more to confirm than to question, and Adrian exhaled quietly, the faint sound carrying through the line. I wanted to give you the choice, he answered, and Lily closed her eyes for a second, letting that settle, because that was something no one had given her in a long time, a real choice, not forced, not pressured, just offered, and she opened her eyes again, her gaze steady now. And if I had not called, she asked, and Adrian's response came without hesitation. Then it would have stayed a good mistake, he said, and something about the way he said it made her smile slightly, a small, genuine expression that reached her eyes for the first time that night, and she looked down at her sketchbook resting beside her, at the drawing she had made without knowing why, and then back toward the door, toward the rain, toward the city that suddenly felt a little less overwhelming. I think I made a lot of wrong turns today, she said quietly, but that one does not feel like one anymore. And there was a brief silence again, not uncomfortable, just filled with something unspoken, something growing between them in a way neither of them rushed to define. And then Adrian spoke again, his tone softer this time, less guarded than before. Are you somewhere safe? He asked, and Lily glanced around the cafe, at the warm lights, the quiet people, the steady rhythm of a place that asked nothing from her. I am, she said, and for the first time she meant it completely, and Adrian nodded slightly on the other end, though she could not see it. Good, he said, and then after a small pause, stay there for a while. And Lily tilted her head slightly, a hint of curiosity returning. And you? She asked, and Adrian looked out through his own windshield at the rain still falling over the city, his reflection faint in the glass, a man the world was searching for, sitting quietly in a place no one would think to look. I am exactly where I need to be, he said, and Lily let out a soft breath.